Hey folks, welcome back for another build video. This time around we're looking at the new Ortiz Exuro Gear Set, which focuses heavily on the Ortiz Incendiary Turret prototype. With this new gear set, the Incendiary Turret now spins 360 degrees in an automated loop, and you are immune to your own Incendiary Turret's fire, and the Incendiary Turret explodes when disabled. I, for one, must say I'm a big fan of this gear set, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. The Incendiary Turret has always been a really cool skill to try and use, but it's been a very niche strategy given the limited range of the turret itself. But now that it spins in 360 degrees when active, the turret no longer has to be manually controlled and just has a much more devastating effect on your enemies, especially in closed spaces. But the one remaining problem with the Incendiary Turret is that really long cooldown time, at least relative to the other turret types, particularly the assault turret. So the way we've gone about fixing that is with the Caesar's Guard chest piece, which sports the perfectly skilled talent. Skill kills now have a 30% chance to reset skill cooldowns. Now, while 30% may not seem like the automatic fix so that my excitement might indicate that it is, that 30% is every time that your turret or drone, as you'll see down there, kills an enemy. And as the math works out, at 3 kills you have a 65% chance of resetting all of your skills total. If you can get 4 total kills with your turret and your drone while they're active, you have better than a 75% chance of resetting your cooldowns for both skills. And as you'll see in the video, with the extended range that this turret has, you're going to be killing enemies left and right. The only note that I'm going to make here is that you actually have to be a little bit careful not to steal kills from your turret. And while that seems a little crazy with a 6 skill tier build, given all of the amplified damage that we're stacking on our weapons, you'll actually need to slow yourself down a bit until you see that skilled icon proc in your HUD, and then you can just go crazy. And then when your turret runs out, it will automatically reset and you can just throw it out there again. With that preamble out of the way, let's get into our specialization. Today we've gone with the Technician to give us the freedom to go with an armor core down there on our knee pads, but you could certainly go with other options. Another one that speaks to mind is the Survivalist specialization. If you're running in a group, the Survivalist Tactical Link will give group members an additional 10% bonus damage to targets with a status effect, which with that turret out and active, almost all of your enemies are going to have a status effect, namely burn. With that in mind, let's get into our primary weapon. We've gone with the Pyromaniac Assault Rifle for that perfectly ignited talent, which deals an additional 25% weapon damage to burning enemies. And after 3 kills, it applies burning to the next enemy you hit. But take my word for it, with the turret out, you will not need that second paragraph all that often. For a secondary weapon, I'm actually going to list off a couple of different options here. One is the Everlasting Gaze named rifle. For the Perfect Perpetuation talent, headshots grant plus 50% status effect damage and duration to the next status effect that you apply. That does have a 16-second cooldown, so while it will be nice for the first application of the Incendiary Turret's damage, it ultimately falls down a little bit over the length of an encounter. So with that in mind, the other secondary weapon that we're going to offer here is the Harmony named rifle, which of course comes with the Perfectly In Sync talent. Hitting an enemy grants plus 20% skill damage for 5 seconds, and then using a non-shield skill or damaging an enemy with a skill grants 20% weapon damage for 5 seconds. And damage increases are doubled while both buffs are active at the same time, which they very often will be between your drone and your turret here. You're going to be supplying a lot of skill damage. And with all of the attention focused on your skills, it's not too hard to pop out of cover and just wing an enemy with your rifle. On top of that, there are just a whole host of exotics that you could go with here. The Capacitor will boost your overall skill damage. The Scorpio is nice to stun lock your enemies. Or if you're really just getting in the status effect and debuff frame of mind, the Pestilence Light Machine Gun would be great for the Plague of the Outcast exotic talent. Next, let's get into our sidearm here, where I've gone with the Future Perfect talent. Weapon kills grant plus 1 skill tier for 15 seconds, and this stacks up to 3 times. Weapon kills at skill tier 6 grant overcharge for 15 seconds. That's the paragraph you want to pay more attention to, given that we're already at skill tier 6. And then the overcharge cooldown is 90 seconds. With a lot of skill build sidearms, I've gone with Future Perfect just for that option to proc overcharge at skill tier 6. But do keep in mind, this is an area where you could go a different route if you so choose. For our mask, we're going to get into our Ortiz Exuro Gear Set here. And we'll go ahead and run through all of the piece bonuses once here, and then reiterate them as we hit them going down the list. But at 2 pieces, we get plus 20% increased burn duration and plus 15% skill health. At 3 pieces, you get plus 40% burn damage. And then at 4 pieces, you get the all-important Ortiz Incendiary Turret prototype. The Incendiary Turret spins 360 degrees, you're immune to your own Incendiary Turret's fire, and the Incendiary Turret explodes when disabled. On top of that, we've gone with skill damage and skill haste in the mod slot here. So real quick, I want to address that you could either go with skill damage or status effects for the Incendiary Turret prototype itself. But because we're also using the Striker drone here, that's why I've gone with skill damage to buff both the Striker drone skill damage and the Incendiary Turret's skill damage. But if you would rather, you could do a mix of both. As you'll see, I have done that on the Golden Gear Kneepads. But I just want to mention that both status effects and skill damage will buff the overall damage output of your turret. It's just about which one you would rather spec into. And because this build also has a drone on it, that's why I've gone with skill damage over status effects. For a backpack, we have our second piece of Ortiz gear here. That gets us to our 2-piece bonus of increased burn duration and 15% skill health. I do wonder if in the future they may move that skill health to something else to really increase the power of this 2-piece bonus. But as it is, that skill health isn't a bad thing to have, as it maintains that your turret doesn't get destroyed during an encounter. Though honestly, there's not a huge chance of that given that all of your enemies within range are likely going to be on fire. On top of that, we've gone with skill damage and skill haste again in the mod slot here. And then on top of that, we have the Heart Stroke talent, plus 25% weapon damage to enemies that are set on fire by the Ortiz Incendiary Turret prototype. And it also increases the turret's range by an additional 25%. And as you'll see in the video, that is a significant increase on the standard Incendiary Turret itself. And then for a moment, I want to pop back up and talk about the skill haste in the mod slot here. This is another place where you could go a different route. If you want something a little tankier, you could go with protection from elites. Or if you want to try and boost that weapon damage, you could spec into either crit hit chance damage or headshot damage. But really, for my money, this build is focused on your skills, and so skill haste, even though we're running skilled on the chest piece, I decided to add some skill haste here in the event that you don't get skilled to proc while your skills are out. It just reduces the amount of time you have to wait for them to come back. And given that the original turret's duration is around 50 seconds, 3 instances of skill haste really helps bring that down, as you'll see below. And for our chest piece, we have the aforementioned Caesar's Guard. 1 piece of Empress International gets us an additional plus 10% skill health. And then down there in the attribute slots, we have skill damage and armor regen. You could obviously reroll that to status effects if you prefer, but on a build like this, I do like just that little bit of armor regen as a passive ability. It helps reduce the number of armor kits that I have to use during an encounter and helps keep me upright. But obviously, your mileage may vary, and if you want to go all out on this build, you want to go with skill damage and status effects, and then skill haste again in that mod slot. And then, of course, for the talent, we have perfectly skilled. Skill kills have a 30% chance to reset skill cooldowns. Now, before we go on, I do want to talk about this chest piece just a little bit longer and talk about the perfect version of skilled versus the normal version. So with the perfect version, you get an increase of 5% to that chance to reset skill cooldowns on every skill kill. And while that may not seem like very much, over the length of an encounter, that's going to build up, particularly at the low end. With a 30% chance to reset skill cooldowns, after only 2 kills, you have better than a 50% chance to reset your skill cooldowns. Whereas with that 25% chance, you're sitting at just over a 40% chance. And again, at 3 kills, you're sitting at about a 65% chance, whereas at 25, you're only at about 58%. So while those differences may not seem super significant, or maybe your eyes have glazed over because I'm just speaking in numbers at this point, the main reason for going with the perfect version of the skilled talent as opposed to, say, 1 piece of Wyvernware and just normal skilled, is that I want to give the turret the best chance possible to reset its cooldown during its total duration time. So while you are giving up a little bit of damage here, there is no way to replicate that additional 5% chance that the perfectly skilled version of this talent gives you. Next, we have our gloves, which gives us our 3-piece bonus of plus 40% burn damage. This one is going to be particularly significant given that we've just talked about the skilled talent on our chest piece, and that additional burn damage is going to give us the maximum chance possible to kill as many enemies as we can. And then for our holster, we have our 4th and final piece of the Ortiz Exuro Gear Set, which unlocks the prototype incinerator turret, giving you all of the benefits that I've already listed multiple times. And as you'll see later in the video, just makes it a beast of a skill. It is an absolute blast to just throw out there and watch it do its thing, while you can tuck yourself safely into cover, where you can do all of the amplified damage supplied by the Ortiz Gear Set and your Pyromaniac Assault Rifle. And for Kneepads, we have one piece of Golan gear here. The freedom to do that, of course, is provided by the Technician Specialization, giving us the +1 skill tier from the Amped talent. The brand bonus here is, of course, plus 10% status effects, which really helps our turret. That core attribute of armor is just helping us keep ourselves alive just that little bit longer. And then for attributes, we've gone with skill damage and status effects here to increase the damage of both our turret and our drone, maximizing the potential of this build to help reset its own skill cooldowns and keep them active for the vast majority of an encounter. With that, let's get into our skills here. We have our striker drone and our incinerator turret. Of course, that is now the prototype version, thanks to our gear set above. First, let's tackle the striker drone, as this is the more optional piece on this gear set. I've decided to go with the striker drone because it is a tier 6 build here, and you get a phenomenal amount of striker damage and health there. On top of that, because your enemies are being set on fire so often, they're not going to have time to shoot down your drone, which is the one major drawback of the striker drone, is the fact that it is more fragile than other static variants. But because your enemies are going to be distracted and status effect locked so often, as you'll see later in the video, it just allows the striker drone to just do its thing and contribute to the overall count of skill kills here, which is really the name of the game. If you haven't figured it out already, you're trying to use this build to get as many skill kills as possible, proc perfectly skilled, bank that for when your skills go down, and then you can just automatically throw them back out and keep everything rolling, which of course leads into our incinerator turret, which now spins in a comical manner in a 360-degree arc, just rotating around and around in a massive radius. It is no longer manually controlled. All you have to do is just put it out there and let it go. In fact, as you see a couple times in the video, I accidentally hit the bumper that is mapped to the incinerator turret, which stops it from firing. So really all you need to do is just put this thing out and let it do its thing. Don't interrupt it. It will set practically everybody on fire, and then between your Pyromaniac and your striker turret, you can just mop everything else up off the floor. So there you go, that is the new Ortiz Exuro Gear Set. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. Do you prefer the Ortiz chest piece, or are you, like me, too impatient to wait for that turret cooldown to go all the way through, and you'd rather circumvent it with the perfectly skilled chest piece talent? Either way, please like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, and tell your friends about the channel so you can continue to help us grow and make videos like this. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.
Detecting additional hostile contacts. Incoming hostiles detected. Detecting additional hostile